The first thing Officer Vance Harlan said when he reached the window was not a question. It was a verdict. He slammed his fist down hard on the hood of the pearl-white Porsche, one powerful blow with his knuckles, the sound cracking across every pump like a gunshot. He grabbed the door handle and wrenched it open before she could reach it herself. "Get out, both of you, right now," he ordered, his voice thick with the slow, satisfied certainty of a man who had never once been corrected in his life. He looked at the two women standing beside their cars, his eyes moving over their faces, their hands, their clothes, and he spoke with the arrogance of someone who believed the world would always bend to his version of it. "You think I don't know what two black women are doing at my gas station, in cars worth more than this whole block? I've been doing this job for over 2 decades, sweetheart. I know a theft when I'm looking at one." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to hold her ground or be pushed back. "Where'd you really get these? Because last time I checked, your kind doesn't exactly finance a Porsche on an honest salary." Then he turned to the second car, to the second woman, and smiled. "Or maybe you two are running product. Nice cars make good cover, don't they? Pull everything out of those trunks, and if you so much as breathe wrong, I will have both of you face down on this asphalt before you finish the sentence." Neither woman moved right away. The taller one turned her head slowly and met his gaze with an expression that held no fear, no anger, no surprise. It was patience, the dangerous kind, the kind forged in years of walking into rooms where the odds were never in her favor. And at pump 4, Dorothy Langford pressed record on her phone and held it steady with both hands, a woman who understood exactly what she was witnessing and refused to let it vanish. She didn't announce it. She simply made sure she wouldn't miss a single second. Because what was coming next on that highway in that heat was something Officer Vance Harlan was not going to see coming. Don't look away from this one. Drop your city in the comments right now. You'd be surprised how many people near you are watching this same story, feeling the exact same rage. If you believe this needs to be heard, subscribe. We're just getting started. Every week I find one story from somewhere in America that stops me cold. Tonight, it's this one. To understand what happened at that gas station on Route 9, you have to understand who was standing beside those two pearl-white Porsches. Not what Officer Vance Harlan assumed they were, but who they actually were. Colonel Maya Langston had dedicated 2 decades of her life to the United States Marine Corps. She had commanded logistics operations across oceans, coordinated supply chains during active deployments, and earned the Meritorious Service Medal twice. She held the rank of colonel and was due to report to the Pentagon in just a few days for a joint operational briefing involving all branches of the military. She had a short leave and had driven down from Atlanta that morning to spend it with her sister. Dr. Lena Langston was Maya's twin by 4 minutes. Lena, the older one, forever insisting those 4 minutes meant nothing. Maya, forever insisting they meant everything. They shared the same face, the same hands, the same habit of going very still when they were angry, a trait their father had called the Langston calm. Lena had earned her medical degree from a top institution, spent 11 years in surgical practice, and built a reputation in neurosurgery that had earned her both published work and the respect of her peers. That morning, she had performed 2 procedures. One routine, one a long and delicate tumor resection on a schoolteacher who had entered the operating room frightened and left it alive because Lena's hands never shook. She had left the hospital in the early afternoon with another major surgery scheduled for that evening. She needed to be back in time. The 2 Porsches had been their father's idea long after he was gone. James Langston had been a Vietnam veteran and a mechanic who ran a small shop for decades. He taught both daughters to change oil before they could drive and to check tire pressure, the way you check a patient's pulse, regularly, without being asked, because neglect was its own kind of violence. He drove an old pickup until the frame gave out, and when his daughters asked why he never bought anything newer, he always gave the same answer. A car is not a status symbol. A car is freedom. You remember that. He had passed not long before. On what would have been his birthday, Maya and Lena bought the Porsches. Same model, same color, same options. Pearl white with black interior. They drove them off the lot together, pulled into his old driveway, and sat for a while without speaking. It was how they carried him with them. They were miles from that driveway when Officer Vance Harlan decided they were thieves. The gas station on Route 9 was a familiar stop. They had pulled in here since high school on the long drive between home and Atlanta, back when they drove their father's truck and the pump handles left grease on your palm. The station had changed owners over the years, but the pine trees behind the lot were the same, and the way the afternoon light moved through them felt unchanged. For the first few minutes after they arrived, it was just another ordinary day. Maya stood at one pump, Lena at the other. They talked across the space between the cars the way twins do, in half sentences, finishing each other's thoughts, laughing at something that would have taken a lifetime to explain to anyone else. Then the patrol cars came. Not one, not two, 6 from 3 directions, lights flashing, no sirens, the kind of arrival meant to surround rather than respond. Harlan's cruiser led from the south. Others arrived from different roads. It was a Saturday afternoon in August. There was no active call, no bulletin, no report of any vehicle matching either description in the dispatch system. Harlan was out of his car before it fully stopped. He was a large man in his mid-50s with the particular confidence that comes from never being challenged. He had more than 2 decades on the job in a county where the sheriff was an old acquaintance and complaints disappeared into a filing cabinet nobody opened. He wore his authority like something he had earned the right to abuse. He walked straight to Maya's car, slammed his fist on the hood, and said what he said. When Lena stepped around the front of her car toward her sister, Harlan's partner, Officer Derek Miller, moved to intercept her. Not aggressively at first, but firmly, one hand raised. Miller was younger, barely more than a year on the force. His face would later be described by journalists as that of a man who already knew this was wrong and had not yet decided what to do about it. Maya still had not raised her voice. She stood beside her open door, both hands visible, and looked at Harlan with that absolute, terrifying stillness. "Officer," she said quietly and clearly, "I'm going to need your badge number, your supervisor's name, and the specific legal basis for this stop." Harlan stared at her. Then he smiled the smile of a man who had never once been forced to answer that question. "Honey," he said, "you're going to need to turn around and put your hands on the roof." Maya did not move. She stood exactly where she was, hands at her sides, open and visible. "Officer, I have asked you for your badge number and the legal basis for this stop. I am entitled to both under the law. I am not resisting. I am asking a lawful question." Harlan stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, and the particular mixture of sweat and arrogance that clung to men like him when they felt control beginning to slip. "Last warning," he said, "and I'm still waiting for your badge number," Maya replied. At Pump 4, Dorothy Langford had not moved. Her tank was full. She had been ready to leave for several minutes. She was not leaving. Harlan turned away from Maya and walked to Lena instead. The tactical calculation of a man who understood instinctively that the sister who had spoken was the harder target. Lena stood beside her car, one hand resting on the roof, watching everything with the focused attention of a surgeon assessing a situation that was rapidly deteriorating. "Open the trunk," Harlan ordered. "On what grounds?" Lena asked. "On the grounds that I said so." "That's not a legal ground, officer." Harlan's jaw tightened. He looked at Miller. Miller looked at the asphalt. "Open the trunk," Harlan said again, "or I will open it for you." Lena held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket slowly, 2 fingers, and produced her key fob. She pressed the button. The trunk opened. Inside was a medical case, a hospital badge, a garment bag, running shoes, and a small insulated bag with forgotten leftovers. Harlan stared at the contents. His expression did not change. He reached in and unlatched the medical case. "Officer," Lena said, her voice tightening for the first time, "that case contains sterile surgical instruments. If you open it without—" He opened it anyway. Scalpel handles, retractors, irrigation syringes, sealed medication vials, packages of surgical gloves, all organized, all labeled, all sterile. Harlan picked up one of the vials and squinted at it. "What is this?" "It's an anesthetic. My name and hospital ID are on the label. I am a neurosurgeon. I have a surgical case scheduled for this evening, and I need those instruments to remain sterile." Harlan set the vial back carelessly and reached for the garment bag. "Don't," Lena started. He unzipped it anyway, pulled out the clothes and dropped them on the asphalt. Then he picked up the medical case, turned it upside down and shook it. Instruments, vials, and gloves scattered across the hot asphalt. One vial cracked. Sterile packaging split open against the dirty ground. Lena Langston stood absolutely still for several breaths. "You just contaminated thousands of dollars worth of surgical instruments," she said. Her voice did not tremble. It was the opposite of trembling. The voice of a woman who had learned in operating rooms that fury and precision were not opposites, but the same force applied differently. "Those instruments were scheduled to be used on a human brain tonight. Do you understand what you just did?" Harlan looked at the scattered instruments, then at her. Then he reached for his handcuffs. "Turn around. I have done nothing. Turn around." Officer Miller took one step forward, then stopped. His hand stayed at his side, fingers spread in the unconscious gesture of a man who wanted no part of what he was watching, but didn't know how to walk away from it. Lena turned around. She placed her hands behind her back. The cuffs went on too tight, the kind of tight that was a message, not a necessity. She made no sound. Across the pump island, Maya watched with that same stillness, but behind her eyes something was already moving. She was not watching as a sister. She was watching as a commanding officer, cataloging, timing, building a sequence in her mind. The arrival pattern of the cruisers, the pre-positioned angle of Harlan's approach, the tow truck that had appeared at the edge of the lot not long after the cruisers arrived, engine running, driver waiting for a signal that had not yet been given. Pre-positioned. She had seen that word in military logistics her entire career. She had never expected to see it applied to a gas station stop in this county. A truck had pulled onto the shoulder of Route 9, a short distance north. The driver, a large man in a work shirt, stood beside his rig with his arms crossed, watching. He had been on the phone since the third patrol car arrived. Inside the mini-mart, a young boy named Jamal pressed his face against the glass. His mother said softly, "Jamal, come away from there." He didn't move. Maya looked at Harlan, then at Lena in cuffs, then at the tow truck idling at the edge of the lot. She stepped away from her car, took out her phone, and dialed. It rang twice. Someone answered. She spoke briefly. Then she ended the call, put the phone back in her pocket, and stood with her hands at her sides in the heat, waiting. Sheriff Trent Caldwell arrived not long after. He drove himself, no department SUV, no second unit. Just a dark blue pickup with personal plates. The kind of truck a man drove when he wanted to look like an ordinary citizen while reminding everyone he was still in charge. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, broad-shouldered in the way of men who had traded muscle for authority years ago. He wore a pressed shirt with his sheriff's star pinned above the pocket. Not quite in uniform, not quite out of it. The calculation of a man who understood optics. He took in the scene. 6 cruisers, 2 women beside their cars, Lena in handcuffs, instruments scattered across the asphalt. Dorothy Langford still recording at Pump 4, and he did not look troubled. He looked inconvenienced. He walked to Harlan first. A brief exchange in low voices, Harlan pointing at both cars, both women, the medical case on the ground. Caldwell nodded twice. Then he approached Maya with the practiced warmth of a politician who had already decided not to learn her name. "Ma'am, I'm Sheriff Trent Caldwell. I understand there's been some confusion here today." "There hasn't been any confusion," Maya said. There has been an unlawful stop, an unlawful search, the destruction of sterile medical property, and the unlawful detention of my sister without charge. I'd like the name of Officer Harlan's supervisor, a copy of the incident report, and my sister released immediately." Caldwell smiled that smile. "We're going to get all of that sorted out, but I need you to understand. When we get a report of vehicles matching this description in this area—" "What report?" Maya asked. "Specifically, what report, when was it filed, and what was the exact vehicle description?" Caldwell paused. Half a beat. The kind of pause that would have been circled in red in any courtroom. "Officer Harlan had information consistent with an ongoing—" Maya's voice did not rise. It simply compressed. "I'm asking you for a specific report number. If a bulletin was issued for vehicles matching ours, it will be in the dispatch log with a timestamp. I am asking you for that number." Caldwell looked at her, and something in his expression shifted from patronizing warmth to something cooler. "Ma'am, I don't carry dispatch logs in my truck." "Then I'll wait while you radio for it." He did not radio. Instead, he walked toward Lena, who stood beside the cruiser in handcuffs, her wrists already reddening, the heat rising from the asphalt in slow, punishing waves. "We're going to get you comfortable," Caldwell said, using the word the way some men use it, as a substitute for compliant. "Why don't we just get you into the station, get this all cleared up in the cool air?" "I have a surgical case this evening," Lena said. "A craniotomy. There is a patient at the hospital in Atlanta who has been prepped and is waiting for me. I need to be released now. We'll try to get you out of here as quickly as we can." "Sheriff, do you understand what a craniotomy is?" He blinked. "It is brain surgery," Lena continued, her voice steady with the patience of someone who had explained difficult things to frightened people for over a decade. "There is a human being lying in a hospital bed in Atlanta whose skull will be opened this evening. I am the surgeon. If I am not there, that surgery is either delayed, with all the risks that carries, or performed by someone less familiar with this patient's anatomy. I am telling you this so that when you make your next decision, you understand exactly what is attached to it." Caldwell stared at her. Something moved across his face, not quite conscience, but the shadow of it. He looked at Harlan. Harlan shrugged. Caldwell turned back to Lena. "We'll have you out of here shortly." He walked back to his truck. Maya watched him go. She had spent 2 decades reading men in positions of authority. Generals, contractors, foreign officials, Pentagon leaders, and she knew exactly what she had just seen. Caldwell was not confused. He was not waiting for more information. He was managing optics. He had come not to correct the situation, but to calculate exposure and decide whether Harlan needed protection or distance. She turned and looked at the tow truck still idling at the edge of the lot. The signage read, "Ridgeview Towing and Recovery, County Authorized." She had seen that name before, months earlier in a federal brief filed on behalf of several plaintiffs who claimed their vehicles had been seized without cause after pretextual stops in this county. The brief had crossed her desk one evening. She had read it, made notes in the margin, and returned it the next morning. She had not thought about it again until this moment. Ridgeview Towing. The driver had still not gotten out of the cab. He was not waiting for authorization. He was waiting for a signal. That was not how a legitimate tow worked. Maya looked at the situation the way she looked at every operational map. Not emotionally, but structurally. The cruisers, the pre-positioned tow, the sheriff in a personal vehicle, the absence of any radio call requesting a bulletin, the systematic nature of the stop. This was not an overreaction. This was a procedure. And then Officer Derek Miller, standing a short distance away, looked at Maya, and then quickly at the ground, the involuntary movement of a man who had just heard something he recognized. She filed it away. At pump 4, Dorothy Langford finally lowered her phone just long enough to switch cameras, confirm the timestamp, and press record again. From the shoulder of Route 9, Earl Whitaker, the retired state patrol lieutenant now hauling lumber, had been on his phone for a long time. He was not calling family. He was not calling dispatch. He was working through a list of names he had memorized over years of watching things go wrong in counties just like this one. One call after another connected. He spoke briefly each time. Then he lowered his phone, crossed his arms, and waited. Inside the minimart, Jamal kept his palms flat against the glass. His mother's hand rested gently on his shoulder. Lena Langston had been in handcuffs for a long time. She had several missed calls from the hospital. She had not been given a single reason, written or otherwise, for her detention. And on the highway, something was moving. They heard it before they saw it. A low, rolling vibration that rose through the asphalt, through the soles of shoes, through bone before it became sound. Too heavy for ordinary traffic. Too deliberate. Too many engines in the same register. Harlan stopped writing in his notepad. Sheriff Caldwell looked up from his phone. Miller turned toward the highway. From the north, moving south on Route 9, with the unhurried certainty of something that did not need to hurry. A convoy of military vehicles came over the rise. Humvees, transport trucks, support vehicles, a command vehicle, and a communications truck, with an antenna array that caught the afternoon light. No sirens. They didn't need them. Traffic on Route 9 moved aside the way water parts around something immovable and patient. The convoy slowed at the gas station access road and stopped, forming a line that effectively blocked the northern exit with the quiet, absolute authority of the United States military. For several long seconds, nobody at the gas station made a sound. Harlan's notepad remained open. His pen stayed in his hand. The lead vehicle's door opened. Sergeant Major Darius Holt stepped out. He was in his 40s, built like a man who had carried heavy things for a long time and had never once set them down. He wore his dress uniform, ribbons telling a 20-year story across his chest. He walked across the asphalt with the measured stride of someone who had crossed harder ground and had no intention of rushing now. He walked directly to Colonel Maya Langston, stopped 2 paces away, came to attention, and spoke in a voice that carried cleanly across the lot. "Colonel Langston, Sergeant Major Darius Holt reporting. Do you require assistance, ma'am?" The gas station fell completely silent. The refrigeration units hummed inside the minimart. A single car passed on Route 9. A bird moved through the pine trees. Nothing else. Dorothy Langford did not lower her phone. She widened her angle. Harlan's mouth opened, and nothing came out. Sheriff Caldwell straightened slowly from the hood of his truck. His face, the particular gray of a man who had just felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought was permanent. Miller's notepad hit the asphalt with a flat sound nobody reacted to, because everyone was looking at Maya Langston. She looked at Sergeant Major Holt with the first expression she had allowed herself since the confrontation began. Not relief, not satisfaction. The controlled acknowledgement of a commanding officer receiving a report from a trusted subordinate. "At ease, Sergeant Major," she said. "Stand by." "Yes, ma'am." Holt stepped back 1 pace, hands clasped behind him, eyes forward, and did not move again. Maya turned to face Sheriff Trent Caldwell. She let the silence hold for several more seconds, long enough for him to understand that the last hour and a half had just shifted into an entirely different dimension. Then she answered the question he had asked earlier, the one she had deliberately left unanswered until this moment. Slowly, clearly, without heat, without drama, without any of the anger she was entitled to, and had spent the last hour folding into something sharper and more useful. "I am Colonel Maya Langston, United States Marine Corps. I am reporting to the Pentagon in the coming days for a joint operational briefing. The woman in handcuffs beside your officer is Dr. Lena Langston, my sister, a neurosurgeon at the hospital in Atlanta who performed brain surgery this morning and has a craniotomy scheduled in a short time for a patient who is currently prepped and waiting. We have been detained at this location for an extended period without charge, without a valid report number, without the legal basis for the stop provided despite multiple requests, and our property has been damaged and contaminated. I am asking you for the last time to release my sister." Nobody in the lot moved. Caldwell's mouth opened, closed, opened again. From the south, another formation of military vehicles appeared over the rise and pulled in from the southern access road. The rear door of the command vehicle opened. Colonel Elias Thorne stepped out. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the erect bearing of a man who had given orders and accepted accountability for decades. He was Maya's commanding officer. He had flown from the base in a military helicopter that landed in a nearby field and driven the rest of the way in a vehicle arranged by Sergeant Major Holt. He looked at the gas station, at the cruisers, at Lena in handcuffs, at the instruments on the ground, at the Ridgeview tow truck still idling. Then, he looked at Sheriff Trent Caldwell. He did not introduce himself. He spoke in the quiet voice of a man who had learned that quiet carries farther than volume. "Sheriff, I strongly suggest you make a phone call in the next minute, because the calls I've already made this afternoon are going to arrive at your office, whether you're ready for them or not." Caldwell looked at Thorne, then at Holt, then at the military vehicles blocking his exit, then at Dorothy Langford's phone. His hand went to his radio. The handcuffs came off not long after. Miller removed them, his hands unsteady. The key missed the lock once before finding it. When the cuffs released, he stepped back immediately, as though proximity to what he had been part of had become physically unbearable. Lena lowered her arms slowly. She looked at the red marks circling her wrists. She did not rub them. She simply studied them with the clinical attention of a physician cataloging an injury, then raised her eyes to Officer Harlan, who stood a short distance away, looking at a point just above and to the left of her face. The practiced avoidance of men who had decided that not quite meeting someone's eyes was an acceptable substitute for accountability. She said nothing to him. She turned and walked to Maya, for one brief, private moment in the middle of that gas station parking lot, surrounded by military vehicles and patrol cars and Dorothy Langford's unwavering phone. The two sisters stood close enough that their arms touched. They did not embrace. They did not need to. They had been finishing each other's sentences and sharing the same silences for nearly 4 decades. They knew how to say everything without saying anything. Then Lena stepped back and took out her phone. Several missed calls from the hospital, one from Dr. Patricia Lang. She called back. "Patricia, I know. I'm on my way. Tell Brenda I'm coming." She listened for a moment. "The surgery is not being rescheduled," she said, her voice leaving no room for discussion. "I will be there. Tell anesthesia to hold the room." She ended the call and looked at Maya. "I need to go." "Go," Maya said. "Will you be?" "Go, Lena." Lena gathered what she could of the surgical instruments from the asphalt, the unbroken vials, the sealed packages that had not split, the tools that had not been compromised, and placed them back in the medical case with the focused efficiency of a woman who had learned to function under pressure, in rooms where lives were measured in minutes. She did not look at Harlan. She did not look at Caldwell. She put the case in her trunk, got into her Porsche, and drove south on Route 9 toward Atlanta. She did not speed. She drove exactly the limit with both hands on the wheel, because she understood, in the precise, clear-eyed way she understood everything, that the safest thing a black woman could do on a Georgia highway in that moment was drive correctly and make no noise. She reached the hospital in time. Brenda Hayes's craniotomy began a short time behind schedule. It was successful, but all of that came later. At the gas station, Agent Julian Fox arrived not long after in an unmarked federal vehicle with 2 colleagues from the FBI Civil Rights Division. He was in his mid-40s, compact and unhurried, with the patient demeanor of a man who understood that the most important thing upon arriving at a scene was to look at everything before touching anything. He took in the cruises, the instruments on the asphalt, the tow truck, Dorothy Langford's position, Miller's body language as he separated himself from Harlan, by a distance that said more than any statement he had yet given. And Sheriff Caldwell, on yet another phone call, his color still poor. Fox walked to Colonel Thorne. They spoke for several minutes. Then he walked to Maya. "Colonel Langston, I'm Agent Julian Fox with the FBI Civil Rights Division. I want you to know we are treating this as a priority matter. I'd like to start with the tow truck." Maya looked at the Ridgeview vehicle that had still not left, whose driver had still not gotten out, who had been sitting in an idling cab for a long time waiting for a signal that was never coming. "I'd like to start there too," she said. What Fox had in his briefcase had not been assembled that afternoon. It had been assembled over months by agents and a forensic accountant in response to a civil lawsuit filed on behalf of several county residents whose vehicles had been seized after pretextual stops. The lawsuit had stalled, the evidence had been building quietly behind it. Ridgeview Towing held the exclusive towing contract for county law enforcement. The contract had been renewed without competitive bidding for years. Ridgeview's owner was Gary Pitts, Sheriff Trent Caldwell's brother-in-law. Vehicles towed after law enforcement stops were held at daily fees with a mandatory minimum period. Vehicles unclaimed after a certain time, often because owners could not afford the fees, were auctioned. Proceeds after Ridgeview's cut flowed through a shell entity that shared an address with Caldwell's campaign committee. Fox opened the file to a page Maya had not seen. It was a dispatch log showing the radio call that notified Ridgeview Towing of the Langston sisters' location on Route 9. The timestamp was minutes before Harlan's traffic stop was even logged. Ridgeview had been told where to go. Maya looked at the timestamp. She looked at Fox. "They called the tow truck before they called the stop." "Yes," Fox said. "This wasn't about us specifically. No, but we weren't random either." Fox turned to another page, a profile sheet noting vehicle type, estimated value, perceived owner profile, resistance likelihood, 2 pearl white Porsche sports cars, high combined value, flagged for a premium hold, the same term Harlan had used in a text message to Caldwell minutes before the stop. The text read, 2 white sports cars on 9 near the station. Black females, premium hold, send Gary. Maya read it once. She did not need to read it twice. She looked across the lot at Vance Harlan, who was watching Fox's agents photograph the instruments on the ground, and felt something settle in her chest. Not anger, not vindication, the cold, clarifying recognition of a commanding officer who had just located the source of a systemic failure. "How many others?" she asked. Fox closed the file. 11 confirmed, he said. "Probably more." Dorothy Langford had lowered her phone for the first time in a long while. She was speaking with one of Fox's agents, her voice steady, her eyes clear. When the agent asked if she had been recording since the beginning, she said, "Since before the beginning. I pressed record when I saw the 6 cars come in. A person doesn't need 6 cars to ask a question." The agent looked at her. "And ma'am, that footage may be the most important piece of evidence we have." Dorothy looked at her phone, then back at the agent with the expression of a woman who had not done it to become important. "Then use it," she said. "That's what witnesses are for." Not long after, Officer Vance Harlan was placed on administrative leave. Agent Fox delivered the notification personally in the middle of the gas station parking lot, in front of every officer present, in front of Dorothy Langford, in front of Earl Whitaker, who had walked down from the highway shoulder and now stood near a pump with his arms crossed and his eyes steady. Fox's voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "Officer Harlan, effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave, pending federal investigation. I need your badge and your service weapon." Harlan stared at him. "Here," Fox said. "Now." The badge came off slowly. The way things come off. When a man has worn them so long, he has forgotten they were never his to keep permanently. The weapon followed. Fox's colleague bagged and logged both items. The process took less than a minute and felt much longer to everyone watching. Harlan looked at Sheriff Caldwell. Caldwell was on another phone call. He did not look back. That, more than anything, seemed to land. The moment a man realizes the person he believed would protect him has already begun calculating the distance between them. Harlan said nothing. He walked to his cruiser, sat in the driver's seat, and stared through the windshield at the pine trees behind the lot. Caldwell ended his call not long after, and walked toward Fox with the careful stride of a man approaching a surface he was no longer sure would hold his weight. "Now, Agent Fox, I want to be cooperative here. Whatever happened today, I want you to know this department takes these matters." "Sheriff Caldwell," Fox said, "I'm going to stop you there. Anything you say to me right now will be part of the record of this investigation. I'd strongly recommend you contact your attorney before continuing this conversation." Caldwell closed his mouth. Fox looked at him, then at the Ridgeview tow truck. "I'm also going to need that vehicle secured. The driver, the cab, the logs, the dispatch records. Nobody leaves this lot until my team has documented everything." The Ridgeview driver, a heavy-set man in a work shirt who had been sitting in his idling cab for a long time, opened his door, perhaps calculating that walking away was still an option. 2 federal agents were at his door before his feet touched the ground. It was not an option. Across the lot, Maya Langston stood beside her pearl-white Porsche and watched all of it with the same stillness she had maintained since the beginning. Sergeant Major Holt stood a few paces behind her. The convoy remained positioned on the access road, engines idling, the physical fact of them making the geometry of the afternoon impossible to misread. Not long after Dr. Patricia Lang arrived, she drove a silver sedan and parked with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had not planned to be here but had come anyway because some things require physical presence. She was the chief of surgery at the hospital in her early 50s, with the composed authority of someone who ran a large department and had learned that true authority, was most effective when it remained entirely calm. She walked to Maya and looked at her. At the wrists, the posture, the controlled expression, with the assessing eyes of a physician who understood what being held in extreme heat for an extended period did to a body, no matter how composed it appeared. "Are you injured?" she asked. "I'm fine," Maya said. "That's not what I asked." Maya paused. "Nothing requiring treatment." Lang nodded. Then she turned and looked at the lot, at the patrol cars, at Fox's team, at the instruments still laid out on the asphalt being photographed. "Those are Lena's," she said quietly. "Yes." "Is she?" "She's at the hospital. She called me earlier. She said Brenda's surgery is on." Lang closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Good." She looked at the contaminated instruments on the ground. "I'll have the hospital file a formal damage report. Every item, every replacement cost, every surgical implication." Her voice was not angry, it was exact. "They need to understand what they destroyed." "They will," Maya said. Earl Whitaker was interviewed by Fox's team not long after. He gave his statement standing beside his rig on the highway shoulder, in the same work shirt, arms crossed, the same posture he had maintained for hours. He had been a state patrol lieutenant for over 2 decades before retiring. He had seen pretextual stops. He had filed reports about them. He had refused direct orders to conduct them on several occasions, and had the disciplinary notations to prove it. He had recognized what was happening at the gas station within minutes of the cruiser's arriving. The calls he made from the shoulder went to former colleagues, active officers, a retired federal prosecutor, and a journalist at a major newspaper who had been covering the county's towing controversy for months. The journalist arrived not long after. By evening, several television cameras were on Route 9. Dorothy Langford, when asked if she wanted to speak on camera, said, "I'll say one thing and one thing only. I've been driving this road for decades. I've seen a lot of things that should have been recorded that weren't. Today I made sure one of them was. That's all." She got in her car, drove to her sister's house, ate dinner, and did not watch the evening news. She already knew what had happened. She didn't need a television to confirm it. That evening, Fox called Maya. The dispatch log showing Ridgeview notified before the stop had been authenticated. The text message from Harlan to Caldwell had been pulled from the carrier. The financial connection between Ridgeview, the shell entity, and Caldwell's campaign committee had been confirmed by the forensic accountant. "This wasn't random," Fox said again. "I know," Maya said. "How long has it been running?" A pause. "Best estimate, a decade." Maya looked out her window at the Georgia night, at the dark tree line and the road running south toward home, toward the driveway where two Porsches now sat under the carport their father had built with his own hands. "Then," she said, "we make sure it ends completely." The federal trial opened several months later, on a Tuesday, in early spring. The Georgia oaks outside the courthouse had not yet leafed out, and the morning air carried the particular cold clarity of the season, the kind of morning that made everything look precise and unforgiving, which suited the occasion. The courtroom was full, not just with journalists, though there were journalists, not just with cameras, though cameras had been on the courthouse steps since early morning. It was full with people who had driven from the county, from Atlanta, from nearby towns. People who had either lost something to this system or known someone who had. People who had read about the case in the months since Dorothy Langford's video had been viewed millions of times and had come to see with their own eyes whether the machinery they had always suspected existed was finally going to be made visible in a room where it could not be walked away from. Walter Ellison sat in the third row in his pressed suit, service medals on his lapel. He had lost his truck more than a year earlier, after a stop on Route 9 on the grounds of a brake light violation that his mechanic, who had inspected the truck days before, confirmed in a signed affidavit, had not existed. Carol Bennett sat in another row holding her late husband's photograph. Her Cadillac had been seized after a stop on a county road and auctioned. She had received no notice, no portion of the proceeds, and no explanation for why the insurance dispute cited in her stop report had never generated a formal citation. Luis Rivera sat beside his wife. His work van, the van that carried his landscaping equipment, that he had paid off over years, that represented the entire operational capacity of his small business, had been seized after a stop on the Route 9 corridor. He had been told it was being held pending verification of commercial registration. By the time verification cleared, over a month later, the van had already been auctioned. His business had not recovered. These were three of the confirmed victims. The federal investigation had identified more. Assistant U.S. Attorney Diana Cross opened for the government with a precision that required no theatrics, because the facts were theatrical enough on their own. She walked the jury through the architecture of the operation, the profiling corridor, the dispatch protocol, the pre-positioned tow arrangements, the financial pipeline from Ridgeview through the shell entity to Caldwell's campaign accounts. She put the text message from Harlan to Caldwell on the screen. 2 white sports cars on 9, near the station. Black females, premium hold, send Gary. And left it there for a long moment without saying anything. She did not need to. The defense, across days of testimony, constructed the only case they had, which was not strong. Harlan's attorney argued discretionary judgment and good faith reliance on perceived indicators. Caldwell's attorney argued administrative distance, that his client supervised many officers and could not be expected to personally review every stop. Gary Pitts's attorney argued that a business relationship with a government contract was not evidence of conspiracy. Cross dismantled each argument with the same instrument, the dispatch log. The log did not lie. It could not be characterized as discretionary judgment or good faith reliance or administrative distance. It was a timestamp. It said the tow was notified before the stop existed on paper. Minutes were minutes, regardless of how many attorneys stood in front of them. Miller testified for the government. He walked to the stand in civilian clothes, a dark suit, no tie, and told the truth in the straightforward way of a man who had spent months carrying the weight of what he had stayed quiet about. and had decided he could no longer carry it. He described running the plates. He described showing Harlan the clean results. He described Harlan's response. He described watching the handcuffs go on Dr. Lena Langston. He described the instruments on the asphalt. He described the Ridgeview truck in the lot, before any charge had been filed. The defense cross-examined him for hours across multiple days. His account did not change. Maya testified, wearing her dress uniform as regulations required. She took the stand with the same bearing she had maintained at the gas station. Straight, unhurried, hands folded on the railing, and answered every question in the same level voice she had used when she asked Harlan for his badge number. Cross asked one question that made the courtroom go absolutely still. "Colonel Langston, when Officer Harlan first approached your vehicle, what did you understand was happening?" Maya was quiet for a moment. "I understood," she said, "that he had made a decision about who we were before he reached the car, and I understood that the decision had nothing to do with the cars." Cross nodded. "And what did you do with that understanding?" "I documented everything I could observe and I made a phone call." Dorothy Langford testified, wearing a navy dress, her phone in a clear evidence bag that she handed to the court officer, with the care of someone delivering something irreplaceable, which it was. The defense attorney asked why she had started recording before Harlan had done anything overtly unlawful. Dorothy looked at him with the patience of a woman who had been answering poorly framed questions for decades. "Because I've lived long enough to know that the overt part comes after," she said. "The decision comes first. I wanted the decision on record." The jury deliberated for a day and several hours. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Harlan kept his eyes forward. Caldwell stared at the table. Gary Pitts looked at his hands. Outside on the courthouse steps, Earl Whitaker stood in the cold spring air and nodded once slowly at nothing in particular. Walter Ellison sat in the third row and did not move for a long moment after the verdicts were read. Then he looked at the service medals on his lapel, straightened one that didn't need straightening, and looked at the ceiling, the way men look at things they can't quite name, but need to acknowledge. "They said it," he said quietly to no one. "They finally said it." Sentencing came on a gray morning that smelled of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Caldwell received several years in prison. Harlan received a significant sentence. Gary Pitts received several years. Additional officers who had participated in the profiling corridor received sentences ranging from over a year to a few years. Ridgeview Towing's county contracts were voided. The shell entity was dissolved by court order. A federal monitor was appointed to oversee the county's law enforcement towing practices for several years. Restitution was ordered for all confirmed victims, not enough, never enough, but real and documented and enforceable. Walter Ellison received a substantial amount for his truck. The accumulated storage fees he had been billed before the auction, and the documented cost of missed medical appointments during the time he had been without reliable transportation. He used a portion of it to buy a used truck, dark blue, clean, registered in his name, which his grandson detailed on a Saturday morning in the driveway, while Walter sat in a lawn chair and offered opinions about the buffing technique. Carol Bennett received a substantial amount. She did not buy another car right away. She sat with the money for some time. Then she went to a dealership in Atlanta and bought a white Cadillac, hung a new rosary from the mirror, and drove it home on a Sunday afternoon with the windows down and her husband's favorite gospel station playing through the speakers. Luis Rivera received a substantial amount accounting for the van, the equipment, the lost contracts, and the documented business losses. He restarted his landscaping company in the following season. Within months, he had several clients and part-time employees. By the following spring, he had more clients and was looking at a second van. Additional victims received restitution ranging from several thousand to over $50,000. More cases remained under review. None of the money returned the time. None of it undid the fear of a traffic stop, the helplessness of watching your property taken, the particular corrosive damage of being treated as guilty by the people whose job was to protect you. Restitution was not repair. Everyone involved understood that. But it was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement, when it had been withheld for a decade, was not nothing. Maya Langston returned to the Pentagon as scheduled. Her formal report, submitted through proper military channels, was detailed. Her commanding officer, Colonel Thorne, noted in her service record, conducted herself with exceptional bearing under sustained civilian duress, demonstrated command judgment, restraint, and institutional accountability. Commended. She was promoted to brigadier general over a year later. She did not attend the press conference about it. She called her sister instead. Lena Langston performed Brenda Hayes's craniotomy on the evening of the day at the gas station, a short time behind schedule, with replacement instruments borrowed from a colleague's kit. The surgery took several hours. The tumor was fully resected. Brenda Hayes was discharged less than 2 weeks later. Several months after that, she returned to her classroom and taught fractions to a group of young students who did not know that their teacher had come within a missed surgery of not being there. Lena never told her what had happened that afternoon on Route 9. Some things belong to the surgeon, not the story. Dr. Patricia Lang filed a formal damage report with the federal court on behalf of the hospital, itemizing every contaminated instrument, every replacement cost, every surgical implication. The report was entered into evidence. It was meticulous. It was exactly the kind of document that made certain things impossible to minimize. Dorothy Langford was invited to speak at a civil rights symposium in Atlanta in the fall. She declined the speaking slot. She attended anyway, sat in the audience, and listened to younger women talk about documentation, witness, and the technology of accountability. Afterward, one of them found her in the lobby and asked if she had any advice. Dorothy thought about it for a moment. "Keep your phone charged," she said, "and don't wait to see if something gets worse before you start recording. By the time it gets worse, you've already missed the part that explains it." Derek Miller left the county sheriff's department several months after the incident. He took a position with a municipal department in a different county that had recently completed a federal compliance review. He was not celebrated for his role in the case. He was not condemned either. He existed in the honest, unglamorous middle ground of a man who had done the minimum right thing, preserved footage, told the truth under oath, cooperated with the investigation without having done it early enough to prevent the harm. He understood that distinction. He would have to. On a Sunday in spring, nearly a year after the afternoon on Route 9, Maya and Lena Langston drove back home together. Same cars, same road, windows down, the Georgia spring filling the air with pine and honeysuckle and the smell of warm asphalt that always reminded them of their father's shop. They pulled into the old driveway. The carport was still there. The concrete still bore the oil stain from the old pickup their father had driven until the frame gave out. The lawn was cut. Maya had arranged for a neighbor to keep it up. The mailbox still had Langston on the side in the letters their mother had put up years ago, 2 of them slightly crooked, never corrected. They sat in the cars for a moment with the engines off. Then they got out and stood side by side in the driveway where they had learned to change oil and check tire pressure and take up space in a world that kept trying to make them smaller. Jamal, the young boy from the gas station mini-mart who had pressed his palms to the glass and watched and not looked away, asked his mother that evening, as she tucked him in, what had happened to the 2 women in the white cars. His mother told him, in the careful, honest way she tried to tell him everything. He thought about it. "So, they didn't do anything wrong?" he said. "No," his mother said. "They didn't." "And the policeman got in trouble?" "Yes." "Because of the lady with the phone." His mother smiled. "Because of a lot of people who decided not to look away." Jamal was quiet for a moment. "Then I didn't look away either." She kissed his forehead. "No," she said. "You didn't. Injustice does not survive because it is powerful. It survives because it counts on silence, on people who look away, drive past, lower their phones, and tell themselves it is not their business. Dorothy Langford understood something that afternoon that more of us need to carry. A witness is not a bystander. A witness is a responsibility. You do not need a badge, a title, or a convoy of military vehicles to matter. Sometimes all it takes is two hands, a charged phone, and the refusal to pretend you didn't see. If this story stayed with you, if something in it made you angry or moved you or reminded you of something you've seen and never forgotten, say so in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what stayed with you. Stories like this one need to be heard, and the way they travel is through people who refuse to let them disappear. Subscribe if you believe that. We'll be here with the next one.